This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This morning on Saturday Breakfast Show, we are looking at tabletop role-playing games, and we are thinking about the lessons that educators can learn from dungeon masters, from games masters, from whatever it is you want to call the people who lead these games.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday, the 25th of January, 2025, and we are here once again with the Saturday Breakfast Show with me, your host, Darren Lester. I am so excited to be back with you all this morning. I've been away for the last couple of weeks, hosting, running, whatever we may want to call it, some Lunar New Year workshops for Year 7 students in a local private school. Oh, excuse me. You can tell that I've not had to do very much teaching this week because the first time I have to start talking for a sustained amount of time, I get a frog in my throat. Yes, I have been the past 2 Saturdays delivering Year 7 workshops on the Lunar New Year, which, of course, is the biggest celebration all across Asia, and which begins in the middle of next week. So we have Little New Year, kind of Lunar New Year's Eve, I believe, is Tuesday. Then Lunar New Year proper is on Wednesday, and then it's a full 2 weeks of celebration. So I hope that any of my listeners in Asian countries which celebrate the Lunar New Year, in Asian diaspora communities which celebrate the Lunar New Year, or anywhere kind of outside of Asia but celebrates the Lunar New Year anyway, I hope that you all have yourselves a fantastic celebration. We are, of course, entering the year of the snake, which is quite scary for some. You know, snakes are not the most popular creature, let's be honest. But for many, it is a strong animal in the Chinese zodiac. The snake is symbolic of wisdom, and it's symbolic of transformation. Of course, that happens across cultures. You know, this idea of the snake sheds its skin, it renews itself, it transforms itself. I always find it interesting that snakes are the symbol of that, when they, of course, are not the only animal that shed their skin. They're not even the only kind of commonly scary animal that shed their skin. Spiders molt. I remember when I was younger, my parents kept tarantulas, and it was always so horrible to wake up the morning after a molt and kind of see 2 of them there in the cage, in the tank, in the vivarium, instead of just the one. So I do find it really interesting that snakes have become this kind of symbolism of renewal, of regrowth, of transformation, because of the shedding of the skin, when they're not the only ones that do that. But that means, of course, that if you are planning on undertaking any kind of transformation, you know, be it a physical one, maybe you want to get in shape, maybe you want to join the gym, maybe you want to change your eating habits, maybe it's a leisure one, maybe you want to pick up a new hobby, which is kind of related to what we're going to talk about in the meat of the show today. Maybe it's a professional one, maybe you want to pick up a new skill, maybe you want to get a new qualification, add a new string to your bow. This is one of the best times to do that. You knew that I was going to talk about this. This wouldn't be Saturday morning breakfast if we weren't talking about kind of new starts, new beginnings, festivals, all of that sort of good stuff. And a new year always gives us that opportunity. So the Lunar New Year is, just in case you're not sure, just in case you go every year into the supermarket and you see the Chinese section and it's festooned in red. And so you pick up, some chow mein maybe, and that's about the extent of what you understand about the Lunar New Year. Because of course in the West it's not something we particularly follow. It's a 60-year cycle. So the I'm going to call it, just as a shorthand, the Chinese zodiac. Of course, China is not the only country that uses this. Japan uses it to some degree. Vietnam uses it. Of course, China uses it. I said that first. Thailand uses it. It's used all across Asia. I'm going to use China as the shorthand because kind of in English and in England, where I am situated, that is kind of the way that we refer to it. We call it Chinese New Year. Even though Lunar New Year is more accurate, and even in China it's called Spring Festival. But that's going to be the shorthand that I use. So in the Chinese zodiac, there are these 12 animals that form kind of akin to the zodiac signs of the West. But of course, they run on years instead of months. So those 12 animals, in case you are not sure, and again, this is very specifically in China, are the rat, the ox, the tiger, the rabbit, the dragon, the snake, the horse, the goat, the monkey, the rooster, the dog, and the pig. That's 12, isn't it? Yeah, 12. Now, they do vary. In Thailand, for example, instead of a dragon, you will be a naga, because that's the kind of Thai equivalent of a dragon. In Vietnam, rather than a rabbit, you would be a cat. So, there are these odd changes, but those tend to be the 12 that certainly we in the West are aware of. So you've got your 12. I personally am an ox. June 1985, that makes me an ox. And this is something actually that I realized when I was doing my workshops. I've run these workshops for a few years, but it wasn't until this year that I realized people don't always accurately know which zodiac animal they are. If your birthday is in January or February, it can actually be pretty tricksy because the Lunar New Year runs on the phases of the moon. And so the New Year itself can be at any point within kind of a 6-week period in January and February. So a colleague of mine who was sitting in the workshop had kind of grown up being told, you are this animal, because that was kind of the animal of the cohort in her school. But actually, she was the animal before. She was the previous one because of when her birthday falls. So, don't assume, I'm a 1985 birth year. Not everybody born in 1985 are oxen. Some of you will be rats if your birthday was kind of before whenever Lunar New Year was in 1985. I do not have that knowledge off the top of my head. So we've got those 12 animals. Okay, and so that makes up a 12-year cycle, and that's the kind of one that, again, especially in the West, we are familiar with. But you've then got the 10 heavenly stems. So those are the 5 Chinese elements: wood, gold, air, fire, and water. And then each of those elements can have either a yin version or a yang version. So you've got the 5 elements, each element having yin and yang, bringing us up to the 10 heavenly stems. And then you've got your 8 earthly branches. So between all of those, we've got this sexagenary cycle, this 60-year cycle that that gets very, very specific. So you could be, for example, a wood horse or a water dragon, a fire rat. Okay, there are all of these different, very, very intricate things, and it can, in Chinese astrology in particular, it can get very, very specific, because you can be different mixtures of animals depending on your personality, your birth month, even down to your birth hour can alter the animal that you are. And this is something that is still followed very, very carefully in China. You know, lots of Chinese parents will still go to astrologers and kind of have their child's chart mapped out so that they can kind of do what is best for their children. So I think it's a really lovely tradition. We will see around, of course, the Hongbao, which are red envelopes, and the children get so excited about this. It is, of course, as with all Chinese words, translated a little bit differently. We've seen this on social media over the past week, where a specific video platform was banned in the US for about 12 hours. Lots of US citizens migrated to the Chinese version of the app, and we saw all sorts of weird and wonderful translations of the name of the app into English while that was happening. So you might see the Hongbao called variously red envelopes, red packets, red pockets, red pouches. But essentially, it is a beautifully decorated red envelope that is filled with money. And if you are married, and I didn't know this until actually I had a Chinese child in one of the workshops that I delivered last weekend. So I didn't realize that you had to be married. But if you are married, then you give a red envelope, a red packet, to the various children who are in your life. If you are not married, you don't have to. So in theory, I'm not married, so I wouldn't necessarily have to give a red packet to my nephews. Which is quite interesting, isn't it? Because I feel obliged to buy them Christmas presents. But I wouldn't have to. But I could choose to. And the red envelopes are then filled with money, and then the child can either put that money into savings or it can be spent on presents. I keep saying child because it does tend to be something that is given to children. Adults can receive red envelopes, particularly, adult children. So it is still very common in China for extended families to live together, or at least live in very close proximity, maybe in the same apartment building or the same complex. And so, adult children may still receive red packets from their parents. But it is kind of a child-centered tradition. And of course they are red because red is a color of good luck. We then have the dragons. I wasn't planning on giving you a whistle-stop tour of Chinese New Year celebrations this morning, but we're just going to roll with it. We then have the dragons. So if you're watching any kind of live streams over the next week or so, you will see the dragon dances. Dragon dance is beautiful. If you've never seen one, I highly recommend trying to find one either in person or online. It's a tradition in which a group of dancers, they are usually trained acrobats, and traditionally they have to have a certain kung fu ranking as well. They will operate a dragon puppet with each person controlling a segment. And as they dance in time to the music, it makes it look like the dragon is dancing itself, and it's this wonderful kind of live, watery motion that they managed to get. I also very highly recommend, if you can find it, watching videos of rehearsals, because watching, of course, with the dragon puppet is amazing, because you can see the dragon at work. You can kind of buy into the story that they're telling. But if you just watch them without the puppet, if you watch the rehearsal happening, you can kind of see the strength and the stamina and the amazing acrobatics that these performers are skilled in. And that by itself is an amazing watch. So I highly recommend that. Kieran was in and then out again. I'm really sorry that I missed you. A very good night to you if you happen to come back or be listening on playback. I was glad to have you in the show for a little while. Thank you for that. Tim has texted in a very good morning to you. Tim is, as I always like to announce him, I should get you your own jingle, I think. A long-term friend of the show, my very, very first guest of the show, and I always welcome his contributions. Tim is a snake. Oh, I'm not surprised. But you have to be careful. So this is the other thing that people often get a bit confused about. It seems logical from a Western mindset that the year of your animal should be your good luck year, shouldn't it? It should represent you. But it's actually the opposite. The year of your animal tends to be the year in which case you have your worst luck. So what I'm going to suggest to any and all snakes out there, kind of when Wednesday hits, do take this time for that personal transformation. Do take this time to, pick up new hobbies and all of that other good stuff. But also make sure that you are taking your time for self-care, that you are looking out for anything bad that could be happening. Because that unfortunately is a thing that we have to watch out for. That was fun. I enjoyed talking to you about Chinese New Year. I said this to somebody over the weekend, that obviously as language teachers, we talk a lot about language because that's what we teach. The qualifications that we teach, certainly in England, the GCSE, the A-level, they are very much language focused. But it is quite often the culture that hooks us. It's certainly the culture that hooks the kids. And for me, it's the culture that is the really interesting portion of the whole, what am I trying to say? The whole linguistic sphere, I suppose. And so I am really happy. I'm really excited that I had the opportunity to share that. And just like for my own professional development, I'm kind of looking at how I can find more opportunities to share the cultures that I am part of, because, British culture, English culture is as much culture as anything else, but also the cultures about which I'm knowledgeable, because that's always so much fun. And I think sometimes, as teachers, we can get bogged down in teaching what's on the syllabus, teaching what's in the specification, and we can kind of lose track of why we are interested in our subject in the first place. And it is quite often the things that hooked us, the things that interested us in our subject, that also interests our students, that can also get our kids on board. So that was a good lesson for me last week, I think.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271 because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC focuses on unpaid and low-paid internships, which a new study says are unfair to working-class graduates and increasingly favour those from a middle-class background. Research from the Sutton Trust is featured in the report, and it says the gap between the two demographics is growing, driven by employers continuing to underpay interns and giving opportunities to family and friends rather than advertising them. A poll of 1,200 recent graduates shows half have undertaken an internship, a 12% increase since 2018. But the gap between working and middle-class graduates has widened from 12% to 20%. The proportion of working-class graduates completing an internship is now only 36% compared to 55% for their middle-class peers. There is also a north-south divide, with graduates in London more likely to have undertaken an internship than those in the West Midlands, Yorkshire and Scotland. The report also says that in many cases those undertaking unpaid internships were able to do so only because they received money from parents, lived at home or with family or friends, or used savings to support themselves. The Sutton Trust also found that internships were almost twice as likely to have been found through family and friends in an organisation compared to an advertisement, further contributing to the widening access gap. As part of its Make Work Pay plan issued before the election, Labour said it wanted to ban unpaid internships, aside from those that form part of an education or training course, although details haven't been confirmed. According to ITV News, Brighton University Academies Trust is to stop running several schools after an alleged budget scandal. The Trust has reportedly told government it plans to hand its portfolio of academies over to other providers. The Trust currently runs 11 primary schools and 3 secondary schools in Sussex and is believed to have kept around 20% from individual school funding. Staff at 5 of the schools in the Trust went on strike earlier this year. In a letter to parents, the Trust says it is facing times of challenge and times of change. And a spokesperson for them said the trustees have informed the Department of Education of their desire to seek to transfer the academies in the Trust to other academy trusts. A DFE spokesperson said they would work to select the strongest alternative providers for each of the schools to ensure a smooth transition. Further details can be found on the ITVX website. In a government website press release, the Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson announces what is described as a digital revolution. As part of her keynote address at the BET Show, she set out plans to harness technology to transform teaching. By using tech at every stage, she stated this would break down barriers to opportunity by ensuring every student and teacher can access the tools and support they need to succeed. She also spoke about artificial intelligence as a radical modernising force for change, whilst acknowledging safety concerns and a plan to work with tech companies to make AI safe for classroom use. Phillipson also spoke about plans to use tech to transform outcomes for vulnerable pupils, including those with SEND, by improving accessibility for all. Full details can be found on the gov.uk website. Finally, the Glasgow Herald features advice to students planning to start university this autumn. The article serves as a reminder of the approaching UCAS deadline on the 29th of January at 6 p.m, including the online form, personal statements and letter of recommendations from schools, which all must be uploaded. Late applications are possible, but only those received by the deadline are guaranteed to be given equal consideration by universities. The article also refers to the Sunday Times Good University Guide 2025, to help students make their choices, with the London School of Economics taking top spot. Scotland's oldest university, St Andrews, is in second place. Top 10 places are also awarded to the likes of the Universities of Oxford and Cambridge, University College London and Loughborough University. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
So while we're thinking about technology, I have a plea. You know that I love technology. I think technology is great. I think it's massively underused in the classroom, and I think that does our students a disservice. But please, can we also get our students used to using Office software? Can we make sure that our students know how to word process and use spreadsheets and save files? Saving, I've noticed over the past couple of years, has become a particular problem because they are so used to things auto-saving. They are so used to the cloud just doing everything for them that they don't often think to save things. I have noticed since that the shift in our curriculum from ICT to computer science, I have noticed a massive downswing in our pupils' abilities to actually use technology functionally. And I see a lot. I think I talked about this when I did my show on teaching different generations last year. So please do go back and find that show if you've not listened to it before. But we quite often, and I've been guilty of this myself as a teacher, we quite often say, oh, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they are digital natives, and so they understand how technology works. They're good at this, but they actually don't learn how the everyday technology that we use does work. They are not used to multi-steps in an Office piece of software, because everything that they use, all of the apps that they use, are designed to be as simple as possible, as functionally easy as possible, because that's what keeps them swiping, that's what keeps them on the platform. And so where kind of Office software isn't keeping up, because it is still being designed for people like me who learned how to use it in school, it means that our students don't know how. So, I am all for making sure that they have coding skills and, making sure that they know how to use the internet safely and all of that sort of stuff. But before we take too many steps too far, can we also make sure that somewhere in the curriculum, at some point during their schooling, they learn how to save a document, they learn how to make things bold, they learn how to underline things, they learn how to indent paragraphs, and all of that stuff that seems to have just disappeared from the curriculum. And if schools are still teaching it, then bless them, they seem to be popping it into the English curriculum, which is already overstretched and overcrowded. So, I feel like, yes, absolutely, let's embrace the technology. How ridiculous would I be if I weren't saying that as somebody that teaches predominantly online now? But please, let's make sure that they also have their base skills, that they also know how to do these things that we take for granted because we were taught how to do it in school. Anyway, that's my little response to the news for today. We are talking this morning about lessons that teachers can take from the tabletop role-playing game community. I'm a geeky person. There's no point even attempting to hide or deny that. I mean, let's be honest, I spend my Saturday mornings sitting here talking to you all about pedagogy. If that's not a geeky pastime, I don't know what is. So, TTRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, things like Dungeons and Dragons, things like Kids on Bikes, all that good stuff, 10 Candles, they are all things that I have been really interested in for a very long time. I've always been a geeky person, and I've never been the kind of person who has felt the need to hide that, to shy away from that. As I was planning this show, I was reminded of something that happened to me. It must have been in year 7 or year 8, where I was still very much into one of the big TV franchises from my childhood. I still am, to be honest. I still watch the show on repeat. I watch international versions of the show. I've got the Funkos, I've got the toys. I enjoy it. But it had been one of those big kind of phenomena that, as I said to a class that I taught this week, I'm not really sure there has been since. And kind of by the time I got to, it was either year 7 or year 8, it wasn't cool anymore to be interested in this particular show. But I still liked it, and a couple of my friends still liked it, and we still talked about it, and we discussed theories. And this was before the days of online fandom, so there weren't fora that we could go to post our theories. There weren't social media accounts for the actors where we could just pop in and ask them a question. It was just groups of people chatting and theorizing amongst ourselves. And I remember very strongly this one day where we were in the changing room getting ready for PE, kind of having a chat about our theories for the series that was currently airing of this show. And it was a very in-depth conversation. And some other lads walked past us as we were talking. I said something, and then my friend that I was chatting about it with kind of went stone-faced and just said to me, "I've got no idea what you're talking about." And that was quite an eye-opening moment for me, because I realized at that point that not everybody was as comfortable in their own likes and dislikes as I was. For me, it was just a case of, well, I like this stuff. I don't really care if nobody else likes it. And I don't really care what other people think of me liking it, because I'm the one that likes it. And I've never really understood getting all caught up in what other people like and dislike, because I personally am not living their lives. But yeah, for me, that was my first big instance of, okay, some people actually get a bit worried about, a bit nervous about their own interests and how other people perceive them. And I think in that moment, something in that friendship shifted. He was somebody that I lost contact with very quickly after we finished school, after we finished year 11. And I think it was probably that moment. This makes me sound like a really awful friend, doesn't it? But it was probably that moment, like 5 years before, where I kind of suddenly realized that his values and my values kind of didn't align. We didn't match. So yeah, I've never been scared of hiding my geeky interests, and I'm perfectly happy to talk to the kids about it, about things that interest me, because I find them interesting. Again, I wouldn't be a teacher if I wasn't passionately interested in the things that I find interesting. The whole point of my profession is that I find languages and literatures and cultures really interesting, and I want to share that with other people. I want to share that with younger people, so that they will find it interesting, so that they can broaden their horizons and go and follow their paths. So yeah, all that to say, I am incredibly geeky, and I don't mind that. It's just who I am. It's just how I am. But interestingly, tabletop role-playing games are not things that I do very often. Certainly not outside of a teaching setting. I would like to, and actually this is why I was quite interested when we were talking about Chinese New Year earlier to think about it as being a time to pick up new hobbies, because I follow a whole forum about solo TTRPGs and kind of journaling role-playing games that you can just play on your own. Because one of the reasons that I don't tend to play role-playing games very often is that it can be very difficult to find other people who want to play. So I'm quite happy to play solo games. I just don't. And so that's something that maybe I ought to, as we enter the year of the snake, and as we, need to transform and pick up new hobbies, maybe I should pick up a few of these solo games. But I have played them in schools before. This was inspired by a paper that I had read by a professor. No, sorry, not a professor. He was a teacher of Latin at a university, and he used role-playing games to facilitate access to spoken Latin, to kind of give his students a chance to practice their speaking skills. I'm not going to tell you too much about that today, because I actually, a few years ago, I did a whole conference talk on that kind of moment of inspiration and how I then use that in my classroom. But that's kind of not what today is about. But it has been interesting to explore role-playing games in my language classroom, both as a way of introducing vocabulary and grammar, and as a way of building up my students' speaking skills. I've enjoyed that very much. But what I want to talk about today is how we can take lessons from the TTRPG community and incorporate them into our teaching in a much broader fashion. This is inspired by my own experiences, obviously using tabletop role-playing games in the classroom, and also by a blog post that I read from 2021. So this isn't new. 2021 was probably... Actually, no, I'd already been using it by that point, because it was a project that I had to put on hold over COVID. But I think what was really interesting in that period, 2019 to 2021, was that as educators, we were having to experiment with new ways to get our information across. We were having to try out new things. And yet a lot of those things went by the by as soon as we went physically back into school. Again, I've spoken about this and my kind of saltiness about this on the show before. This is something else that I have done a whole seminar about, in kind of my hope that we would retain some of that good stuff. But, we didn't. We went back to the normal. We wasted that opportunity, and there's no point pretending that we didn't. So I kind of have to try and fight the good fight another way. But the reason that I say that is because, in terms of like pedagogical research, I would say that 2021 is quite old. It's 4 years that people have been testing this out, for longer, of course, because this wasn't new even then. But it remains relevant, in my opinion. It remains a really good way for us to improve our own teaching. So I'm going to compare the role of the teacher, and this is kind of the conceit of the show today, I suppose. I'm going to compare the role of the teacher to that of the dungeon master. Now, depending on the type of game that you play, this role has different names. Sometimes it's the dungeon master, sometimes it's the game master. There's a whole host of terminology for it, and that will change depending on whatever system that you are using. But the dungeon master, the DM, that's kind of going to be the term that I use today, is the facilitator of the game. It is the DM's responsibility to create a game that engages their players, to create a world that feels rounded, that feels real, to guide the players towards the ultimate goal, and to adapt their decisions based on whatever it is the players are doing. So a tabletop role-playing game, a TTRPG, is very different to a board game in that the players have much more freedom. In a board game, you are very much bound by, you're going to roll your die or your dice, you're going to move your pieces, you're going to go through whatever mechanics you go through, but it's very much a controlled world. Whereas in a TTRPG, you are building the story together. It's a form of collaborative storytelling where the DM kind of has ultimate control over the world, but it's not scripted, and the rules are there to kind of put boundaries but not control anything. And so the DM has to make very, very quick decisions, change the storyline, perhaps change the rewards that she was planning on giving her players based on the decisions of those players. And of course, to me, that sounds a lot like being a teacher, because a teacher designs a learning experience in the same way that a DM designs a gaming world. We facilitate discussions between our students. We guide them towards their learning goals. We adapt to their needs. We adapt to whether or not they have understood the objective of the lesson, whether or not they have responded well to the activity that we've designed, in the same way that the DM adapts the game based on how their players respond to the world that they have created. We do essentially game our whole classroom, even if you're not into the gamification of learning, even if you think that we attempt to make learning too fun, too entertaining, too gamified. We do try and game the system, because the whole point of our profession is to do whatever we need to do in order to make the students achieve these goals. So we've got these core parallels of the facilitation of exploration and trying to balance structure and flexibility, trying to make sure that our lessons are interesting, trying to make sure that the game is engaging while still achieving these very prescriptive goals that are set out in a game book or in a curriculum document. So both roles aim to inspire curiosity and kind of wrangle the active participation of others while being kind of bound by these documentations that they have to follow. And then, of course, as a DM, you actually have a lot more flexibility over how closely you'll follow your documentation. Because if you want to throw out the rule book, you can, which is unfortunately less of an option in teaching. Now, one of the whole points of a TTRPG is the creation and crafting of an immersive narrative. And it's this kind of narrative idea that I think draws me to the concept of TTRPGs. I like to write. I started writing fiction. I've not been very successful at writing fiction. I've published a couple of short stories. I've published a couple of novels. They've not been particularly well received. They've not been panned, but, they weren't the soaring bestsellers that I hoped they would be. Part of that is my own fault for kind of not realizing how much marketing I would need to do in order to make sure that they found their way to an audience. But I enjoy creating stories. I'm not angry about the fact that my writing, the writing strand of my career, has shifted towards nonfiction and towards textbooks. I feel like that is kind of more cohesive. It's more in keeping with obviously what I do as a teacher. But creating fiction was actually where I started. You guys know, if you are long-term friends of the show, that before going into teaching, I was in acting. I was in the West End. I'd done some TV spots, that sort of thing. So I've always been interested in this idea of creating narratives, of creating worlds. And I've always loved the idea of a classroom as a microcosm, a classroom as its own little world. Another kind of very vivid memory of mine, and the one that always comes to mind when I'm asked why I went into teaching, was of being in year 3. I loved year 3. Year 3 was a great year for me. My teacher was called Mrs. Jones, and she was lovely. She was one of those teachers who was a teacher slash mum. It probably helped that her son was the year below us in school, so she kind of was kind of going through that mumsiness in her own life and sort of applied that to us. But she was great. And I vividly remember this one day where we were in the classroom and it was storming outside, and this classroom was kind of a hexagonal shape, and on 3 walls there were windows, and I remember it being grey outside and it was battering with rain. And contrary to popular depictions of this country, it does not rain in England as much as people like to say that it does. Well, particularly not where I am. Again, I'm in a valley, so we are protected by the hills, but we don't get nearly the amount of rain that people like to say that England has. And I like rain. You guys know that I like rain. And I remember being in the classroom and the rain was battering against the windows. It was, properly hammering it down, making loads of noise. It was grey, it was windy. The lights were on. We were being told a story, and Mrs. Jones made this particular day just really cozy. Just incredibly cozy. Our classroom felt like it was a very safe space in that moment, sort of against everything that was going on outside. And I vividly remember that as a classroom that was a world. And that's what I've always wanted kind of my classroom to be, is its own little world where whatever was going on outside didn't really matter, because we were inside exploring whatever it was that we were exploring, and kind of, creating that narrative of the classroom. And so I think, for me, that immersion, that concept of immersion that comes up in TTRPGs has always been what I've wanted my classroom to be. I've wanted my classroom to be an immersive learning experience. I'm not one of those language teachers that only speaks in the foreign language, because I don't find that is effective at all. Explaining grammar is difficult enough in English, or whatever the first language of your pupils might be, without then adding the extra layer of them trying to fathom it with vocabulary that they're not familiar with, or grammar structures that they're unsure about. So I've never tried to create an immersive classroom in that way, but I have always tried to make sure that once my children were in my classroom, they were aware that they were in the world of Latin, French, Chinese, Japanese, German, whatever it was I happened to be teaching in that period. And for me, that makes a more productive learning experience, because it helps to keep the children focused. Now, for all of the teachers who are about prioritizing building relationships, you might be horrified about the fact that I don't bring the children in and immediately start talking to them about what happened on Traitors last night, or how the football went last weekend, or anything like that. But I try to keep it focused on the culture, the language, the lessons that I'm teaching. But you can still build relationships through those lessons, particularly in a languages classroom, but for everything. Reality TV exists in every country. So if they come in and they want to talk about Love Island, I can talk to them about whatever reality TV might be going on in France, in China, in wherever at that time. If they want to come in and talk about football, we can do that within the context of the the world that I have created, the the countries that I am talking about. So, creating an immersive narrative within your classroom doesn't preclude creating relationships with the children. But what it does do is it stops the children from controlling those relationships. And I think quite often when we have the building relationships narrative, that's where we go wrong, because we assume that building relationships is about letting the children take control of it. But when the children take control of the relationship with the teacher, when the children take control of the relationship of them with the classroom, it starts to be moved away from the lesson. It starts to be moved away from the subject. And as you know, I'm a scholarly teacher. I believe that children come into my classroom to learn my lesson, and then they will go to somebody else's classroom to learn their lesson. As much as possible, I like to stay in my lane, obviously while following all necessary safeguarding procedures. But I think, having that immersive narrative, allowing us to control how we are building those relationships with those children, it gives us the power back, and it gives our subject its power back, because it once again prioritizes the subject over everything else. It's not of a case of, oh yeah, come on in, we'll talk about whatever you watched on TV last night, and then if we've got some time, we'll do some maths. It's, come on in, this is about maths, and I'm going to show you how this is relevant to your life outside of my classroom. And I think quite often, because we don't ground the lesson as being central, we inadvertently foster that narrative of the lesson is less important than everything else. And yes, we have our children who are going through things. Everybody is going through things at one time or another. Sometimes those things are more grave than others, all of that good stuff. But ultimately, they are in our classroom to learn our lesson. And I do think sometimes schools lose track of that, because of all of the other 1,001 things that we are expected to do within a day.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271, because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
One of the things that I've been teaching quite a lot over the past few weeks has been verbal reasoning. The deadlines for applications for some of the independent secondaries are coming up. And so a lot of children will be doing verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning tests as part of their application process, or maybe as part of a scholarship process. And I've been doing a lot of tutoring of verbal reasoning over the past few weeks. And verbal reasoning tends to have a lot of story-based questions. It kind of like the problem-solving questions that come up in maths. Jenny buys 56 watermelons for her 27 crows. If each watermelon costs 56p, how many crows can she feed with £97.45? That sort of thing. And I know that a lot of children tend to hate those questions because they've got to dig through the story in order to find the information that they need. And there is always that part of me as a teacher that is just like, right, okay, don't worry. I'm going to dig through the story and I'm going to give you just the core information so that you can find the answer. But ultimately, it is actually the story that surrounds that. It's the narrative that is important there, because it's the narrative that applies it to real life. Because if you're in a shop and you are figuring out how much change you need, for example, if you know that you've got a £20 note and you are going around picking things up and you're adding them up in your head, then your narrative could very well be, okay, so I'm throwing this tea party. I actually have now overspent. I don't have enough money for all of this stuff in my basket. And so I think that I need to put the scones away because Thomas is gluten-free, and so the scones can't be enjoyed by everybody, whereas the tea cakes can. And so it's the narrative, it's the reason why you're doing this thing that is actually more important in that moment than how much money you're going to save, because ultimately all you need to do is make sure that your basket drops back to below whatever the maximum amount of your budget is. So quite often I think we get it wrong when we try and simplify the narrative for our children, because we forget that life is narrative. We forget that everything around us is a story. Every interaction that we have with somebody is a story that is being told. And what we should actually be doing, rather than trying to simplify that for the children, is teach them how to use the story to inform the data. How to extract the data from the story without diminishing the importance of that story. The benefit to all of this is that students connect emotionally to the lessons that they are being taught. They have these memories of this immersive classroom. I've given you 2 stories already today, just based on this idea of using TTRPGs in the classroom from my own school days. These are the things that stick. And again, if you are one of those teachers who is as interested or more interested in the life lessons that could be taken from your classroom than the curriculum lessons, then those are the memories that will be made. These stories, this narrative that you are constructing in your classroom, is how you will be remembered as a teacher. So it is very important for us to think about the narrative that we are constructing, because whether we want to or not, we are constructing a narrative. We are creating memories. They may be good memories, they may be bad memories, they may be memories that fade, but they are being created. And so if we're not deliberate about the narrative we're creating, if we are not in control of the narrative that we are creating, then what are we actually doing? TTRPGs, in theory, and that's my caveat, in theory, facilitate collaborative problem solving. Now, I say in theory because the last time that I ran a TTRPG in my classroom, it fell apart because my pupils would not collaborate. It didn't matter what scenario I set up for them. It didn't matter how I ran the story. It didn't matter what twists and turns I set up for them. They decided that they were going to be against each other from the beginning. And once they had decided that, there was nothing that I could do that would get them to work together. And unfortunately, the project fell apart. Because tabletop role-playing games only work if everyone is working together. Because if you have got, luckily it was a small class. I think it was 5 kids. But even just with 5 kids, all of them trying to go off and do their own thing and within the game and trying to win, in inverted commas, trying to make sure that they beat their peers instead of trying to beat me, it meant that nothing was ever being progressed. We didn't ever make any progress through the story, through the conceit of my lesson, because they were so busy trying to one-up each other. So I think TTRPGs do foster collaborative problem solving, but you've got to make sure that your class is one that wants to collaboratively solve problems. And I think the reason that I did the TTRPG scenario with this particular class was because I knew that they were all avid gamers. They would come into class chatting about the games that they played. I knew that they played online with each other outside of class. So I thought that this would be something that they would really get into. What I didn't think about was how many games at the moment do just pit you against everybody else. Even ones that seem collaborative still kind of eventually encourage you to turn on the people that you are collaborating with. And so it had become ingrained in them that there would only be one winner and they had to be that winner. And so it was just a natural part of their game playing mechanic that they would try and outdo each other. So that was a failing on my part for not kind of fully thinking through how they would treat a game playing scenario. But what TTRPGs, when they are run by an experienced DM with players who actually want to succeed, is it fosters this sense of collaboration. It fosters this sense of problem solving, which is what we want in the classroom. In my classroom, in languages, I often use the Rosetta Stone as an example of this. Because, I could very easily just stand up and get them to recite verb endings like we all did when we were at school. But that's not helpful. That's not useful to anybody. So what I do is I explain to my students the story of the Rosetta Stone, the idea that this stone was found and, it was the same message written in 3 languages, a couple of which people spoke and one of which nobody spoke, and by using the ones that they did speak they could decipher this one that they didn't, and that's how we learned how hieroglyphics worked. And I use that as an example of how working together, instead of just relying on me to tell them stuff, how they can work together in order to pool their own knowledge. You can tell that I'm a social constructivist. That's the word that I'm struggling to find. They can pool their ideas, they can pool their own knowledge to figure out these language rules. So one of the things that we used to do was, when teaching reflexive verbs, which don't occur very often in English, people use the reflexive pronoun incorrectly in English all the time. It's really annoying. But we don't have very many reflexive verbs in English, whereas in French there are loads of them. Je me rase, I shave myself. So it's not just I shave, it's I shave myself. Je m'habille, I get myself dressed. Je me lève, I get up. Quite often we teach them in the context of daily routine, so that's where they all come from in my head when I'm sort of off the cuff. And so what we used to do was just put a whole bunch of these up on the board, just display them and give the kids 5 minutes to talk to each other. And without giving them any context, what do you notice? What can you see? what do you think is going on here? And they would talk to each other and they would work together. So in the same way that you would hope as a DM, your players would work together in order to solve whichever puzzle you've come up with for them to solve, or defeat whichever enemy you've come up with for them to defeat. You can get your kids to work together in order to find rules, in order to figure things out. And if they've worked it out for themselves, it's going to stick so much better than if you just tell them. Because as I always say to my students, their brains will believe them more than it will believe us. And so if they've figured it out, it's why misconceptions stick. If they've figured it out, then it's going to be concrete in their heads so much quicker than if we've just told them what is going on. This also, again, if we're thinking wider curriculum, this kind of collaborative work that is being fostered, it enhances communication, it enhances interpersonal skills, it teaches conflict resolution, and it teaches respect for diverse ideas. And again, when I ran my TTRPG in my classroom this last time, that was probably a failing on my part, is that I didn't facilitate the conflict resolution enough. So if your students do start to become quite disparate in terms of their goals, if they do start to fall apart a little bit in terms of what they're trying to do, it is your job as the teacher, it is your job as the DM, it's your job as the facilitator to try and bring them all back together, to get them back on the right track. And that can be really hard when you want things to be discovery based, when you want them to figure it out for themselves, when you want them to follow a path that interests them. It can be really difficult to turn around and say, actually, no, what I need you to do is this bit. And so, you do have to bring those improvisational skills in so that you can make it seem like it's their idea, but get them back on track for what you want them to learn. In us, it encourages flexibility and adaptation. So let's say you've set up this story, you've got a bunch of adventurers, you're in like fake medieval Europe where all fantasy takes place, and you set up this dragon who is the enemy of your players. But throughout the hour, instead of killing the dragon, which was your original intention, your players befriend the dragon. So as the DM, you've got to adjust that story. You've now got to find a way to make that dragon that was supposed to have been killed off an integral part of the story, a playable character throughout. And in that same way, as teachers, we may say something. A number of times that I've done this, where I've said something off the cuff, I've just made a little aside, and that has been what the kids have latched onto. That's what the kids have wanted to know more about. And so I've had to adapt my lesson plan to kind of profit from the fact that they are interested, to kind of go with that. I did that just on Thursday. I was covering a year 4 French lesson, and they were learning about food. And so we went back over, je voudrais, I would like, s'il vous plaît, please. And one of the kids asked me why there was a circumflex, the little triangle, over the I in plaît. And so I explained. And I drew on the board, and we talked about how in Old French there used to be an S next to it and all that good stuff. And that then led to this whole conversation about other words that the circumflex was in, and can we work out what they mean based on the fact that there used to be an S next to them. And so, we did the easy ones like hôpital, and then hospital, hotel, and hostel. We talked about how hostels and hotels are different. Then we did some of the harder ones. So we did like gâteau, and then we did the link between gasto and like gastronomy. and I had to explain what gastronomy meant. And, this idea of taste with that ST in it, just like in gusto. And it became this whole thing. It was only 5 minutes that we had this conversation, but it was in a 30-minute lesson. So that's a decent chunk of the lesson. But I decided that I would roll with it because they were interested, and because it is relevant to the curriculum. Now, like I said, I was covering, so I'm not entirely sure how happy the actual teacher of that class was that I went off on that tangent. But I did text her afterwards to apologise and explain, so hopefully it's all okay. But sometimes we do. Sometimes, we have our lesson plan, we know what we want to get through, but we have to pivot. And that pivoting is a good thing. I don't care what anybody says when they come in to observe you. I don't care if your line manager tells you, oh no, you went off on this tangent and it's not on your lesson plan and that's not good enough. If you are following the children's line of interest and it is not entirely unrelated to your subject, then go for it. Now, I think in languages, I come from a place of privilege because in languages, pretty much everything is relevant. I'm thinking, if I were in my classical civ class and I was teaching about the Roman baths and somebody asked me about the Mithras Temple in London, would I be as willing to go off on a tangent about that? Actually, to be fair, I probably would, because I could make that still about religion in Rome, and I could make it about the religious significance of Roman baths. Yeah, do you know what? I'm just going to be all for going off on the tangent today. I've decided I might change my mind next week, but that's one of the good things about pedagogy and about teaching. You can believe something until you find evidence to change your mind, and then you can go with something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having spent 3 years thinking that mini whiteboards were the best thing ever invented, only to then think that actually you prefer laminates for whatever reason. Being a teacher, being interested in pedagogy, is all about doing what is right in the moment. It's like being a DM. It's about doing what is right in that moment for that group of children in front of you. And when you learn that something else is better, then that's what you do. And I think sometimes as teachers, we can be resistant to change. We can be resistant to new ideas because it means that what we were doing before, what we thought was our best work, what we thought was the best possible pedagogy, wasn't. And I think sometimes it can feel like we've let the kids down when we were doing things that were not the very best that they could be. But if we don't learn to embrace better ideas, then we're letting our current kids down by not doing things the best way that they could be done. Yeah, go off on the tangent until I say otherwise. But pivoting from a set curriculum, going off on a bit of a tangent, it can keep them engaged. It can keep their learning relevant to them. It does encourage agency in a way that is natural. Now, I remember, again, being in junior school specifically, and we would start a new topic. This was when topic-based learning was all the rage. And, the whole year group would get together and we would be asked what we wanted to learn about. And we felt like we were being given the opportunity to engage with our learning, and that we were being given agency over what our teachers were going to teach us. What we didn't realise, because we were 7, was that they had taught this same topic for years. All 7-year-olds are interested in the same stuff. And so, they were just going to trot out their lesson plans anyway. But we felt like we had chosen things, and every so often they would pull out the spider diagram, the mind map, and they would show us where we had said we wanted to learn something. And then, we felt like we were in charge.
even though it was kind of on stage. Whereas if you go off on a bit of a tangent in a lesson, you actually are responding to what those specific students are interested in that moment. Which, is not to say that the contrived relevance is bad, because we were interested. If we weren't interested in these things, we wouldn't have said that we wanted to study them. They wouldn't have been on that mind map. But by kind of going with the flow a bit more in your lessons, like a DM does in a game, you are really responding. You are genuinely responding to what your pupils want in that moment, and you are showing them that education isn't about following a prescriptive curriculum. It isn't all about this is what the government says you should learn, so this is what I'm going to teach you. But it can be, and it should be, about what is it that interests you. Oh, here are the tools for you to find that out. Here are the tools for you to discover that. Even though VAC is long gone, and VAC had actually been gone before we were even taught to use it in our classrooms, visual aids and diagrams are still incredibly helpful. And this is something, again, that is I use a lot in TTRPGs. DMs will create maps of their worlds. You can spend ridiculous amounts of money on buying miniatures for your Warhammer set, or you can get cards for your Magic the Gathering contest, whatever it might be. You can invest a lot of money in the visuals in TTRPG, and again, we can do the same in the classroom. Tools like flowcharts and timelines and infographics, that's the big one at the moment, isn't it? But I quite like infographics, particularly at A-level. MFL A-level students need to be able to recall and use facts and figures from the target language country in their speaking exam to justify their opinions. And infographics are a really good way of getting students to remember those. So, keeping the visuals, keeping the miniatures, keeping the diagrams, keeping your displays relevant and up to date are all really helpful in getting your children to remember their information, in the same way that the map is useful in getting the players to remember where in the world they are. The miniatures are useful in helping the players to remember where the rebel army is coming from, so they know how long they have got to gather their supplies before they go into battle. Chunking is the other big thing, or is another big thing that's in vogue at the moment. And chunking in TTRPGs happen quite naturally, because what you tend to do is you say, right, our gaming session lasts for 2 hours. It runs 2 till 4 on a Saturday afternoon. And regardless of where you are in your story, when those 2 hours are up, you have to finish, because everybody needs to go home and, feed the kids or go to work or whatever it is that they have to do. And so quite often what needs to happen is that the meta quest, I suppose, the big story that the DM is telling, needs to be broken up into smaller subquests so that your players feel like they are making progress within the 2 hour session. And also so that there is not loads of information for them to retain in order to accurately start the next session. Does that sound to anybody else a bit like a lesson? You've got this big overarching concept that you might be teaching, such as the story of Balkis and Philemon. That's going on in my GCSE Latin course at the moment. And there's a lot in there that you know that you need to teach. You know that you've only got a certain amount of time in which to teach it, so you break everything down into these small, manageable chunks. And you then use your checkpoints to review understanding in the same way that a DM might use checkpoints to remind their players, oh, you've got this in your knapsack, you've got this in your arsenal, knowing that those things will be useful when the rebel army comes towards them. We don't always know what's going to be on our tests, on the big exams that they take. You know, that's our rebel army advancing towards us, the GCSE, the A-level, whatever it might be, the SATs. We don't know what's on those. We do know what's on the smaller assessments, though. We do know what's going to be on the in-class tests that they get next week. We do know that these certain concepts are going to be tested on the GCSE, the A-level paper, even if we don't know the exact way that they're going to be phrased. And so every so often we can stop and we can check in. And we can remind them that they have these tools in their arsenal. And what this does is it prevents a cognitive overload, and it helps our students to stay focused and to gradually absorb their material. I've spoken before about how we need a curve of remembering as much as we need a curve of forgetting, because it does take time for a concept to be absorbed into the long-term memory. And it needs to be retrieved, this is the point of retrieval practice, regularly so that they remember that they know it. And so, you know, what we call retrieval practice, what we might call low-stakes testing, are just TTRPG checkpoints, reminding children what is in their arsenal, reminding children what is in their knapsack, so that they know what tools they have when it comes to facing that rebel army.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Meet USA Study, your one-stop platform for guiding students through their college application journey. Access up-to-date resources on universities, programs, scholarships, and application requirements, all in one place. Get easy-to-access tools, personalised timelines, expert tips, application templates, and exclusive webinars with admissions officers to help your student stand out. Visit usastudy.co.uk or call Phil at 0800 612 8271, because every student deserves the opportunity to shine with USA Study.
So let's say you've set up this dragon Tiamat as the big bad of your whole campaign. Your players come to the boss battle against Tiamat, but instead of slaying the dragon, like you as the DM assume is going to happen, they befriend it. They figure out that what is in their knapsack is Tiamat's favourite food. You know, Tiamat really likes swede, and they've got loads of swede in their knapsack. So they feed it, and they make friends with it. That is creative problem solving. That's a creative solution to what could have been a gruesome, bloody battle. And as the DM, you kind of have to go with it, because you understand that what your players have done is actually create a better story than the one that you had originally intended. You kind of need to let your ego go and just be like, do you know what? My players have done a better job of this than I have. Let's see what I can do with it. Let's see how I can spin it. And that's going to be the same thing in your classroom. So your classroom, just like a TTR campaign, a TTRPG campaign. A TTR campaign is me telling you that you should come to the next Teach Meet on the 1st of March. That's the TTR campaign. Your TTRPG campaign should be encouraging brainstorming, encouraging risk-taking without a fear of failure, or actually without a fear that failing is going to lead to disastrous consequences. Low stakes. So a writing prompt, for example, if you're an English teacher, is a good example of this, because you can't fail a writing prompt. As long as you followed the prompt, you physically cannot fail. And again, in MFL, this is something that I think that we should be doing a lot more, because that's part of what the writing exam is all about, getting children to write to prompts. So, we encourage the experimentation in our classroom. We encourage going off piece thinking. We encourage creative problem solving, because then when they are sitting in their exam, having to think of ideas, having to come up with content off the cuff, they are going to be able to do it. Because in the humanities, answering essay questions can be and is really, really difficult. It can be really hard when you're under timed exam pressure to come up with an idea. So encouraging those creative solutions beforehand, encouraging that imagination that we are always worried our children don't have, is a good way to reduce that cognitive load when they're sitting in an exam. Reduce that worry before they work in, because they know how to brainstorm scenarios. They know how to come up with different ideas. They have been through that process in the safety of your low stakes environment. TTRPGs should hopefully help to build empathy, because your players will create a character, and it could be a character that's very, very different from them. There's an episode of a British comedy show which is centered around TTRPG, and the idea is that you've got the conceit of the show is that you've got these really kind of laddish characters who are guest characters in the show. They're coming in, they're being entertained. Usually the office that would entertain them will take them to strip clubs and card games and all that sort of stuff. But they are invited to take part in a TTRPG, and one of the characters plays a very beautiful female wood elf. And kind of the very short character arc of that character is that he learns to treat women with a bit more respect through playing a woman in this game. It's set up as being funny, that this very laddish, seeing women as objects character then plays a woman. But you can kind of see that subtle character growth through the 20 whatever it is minute episode. And empathy is something that we want to build in our children. So, if we're teaching Shakespeare or we're teaching classics and we're doing Julius Caesar, can we role-play the assassination safely to figure out who we should be empathizing with? Are we empathizing with Caesar because he was the one who was murdered? Are we empathizing with Brutus because he felt driven to it? Are we empathizing with the other assassins because they were kind of caught up in this herd mentality? Who are we empathizing with? What is going on there? How do we build that empathy? And quite often we talk about, particularly with our younger learners, we talk about lacking empathy. Empathy is something that does eventually come as they move through Vygotsky zones of development. As they become less egocentric, our learners do develop empathy. But couldn't we all benefit from learning to be a little bit more empathetic? Couldn't we all benefit from learning how to see other people's point of view a little bit more, particularly given the climate of the world right now? Let's be honest. And finally, I'm on slide 10 of 14 of my PowerPoint. That's not too bad, but we are down to the last minute. In a TTRPG, you have very clear objectives and you have very clear feedback. Our goal of this game is to kill the dragon. That's what we have to do.
okay, you have gone off piste now, we're nowhere near the dragon. If you are going to achieve this goal, you need to look at the map and figure out how to get back to it. And we have that same attitude with our children. And I think sometimes we're a bit afraid to share the overarching, the long-term goal with them. We're very good at giving individual lesson objectives. We're very good at saying, in the next 30 minutes, you're going to do this. But sometimes we shy away from telling them, you have got this exam that you are going to have to sit. And right now, you have gone off the map. You are nowhere near where you need to be in order to sit this exam and succeed. So let's figure out a way to get back there. Sometimes we are afraid of making our children aware of the fact that they could fail. And I know that this works against what I've just said about low stakes, safe environments and all of that sort of stuff. But I think, again, particularly with our older learners, we must make sure that they are realistic about the threat that they're facing, to use TTRPG language, that they understand where everything is coming from and where everything is going, what everything is leading towards. And if we can feed back to them that they are too far off piste, they are too far off the map, then that can only be a good thing, in my opinion. You can tell that I've been away for a couple of weeks because I just want to keep talking. But we are now over my time, so we will end it there. I do hope that you've enjoyed today's show. I do hope that you have taken something from it. I am the only show on network today, so if you are feeling a bit lonely later this afternoon, please do go back through the archives, not just my archive, although you are very, very welcome to. I'm always happy when I hear that people have gone back and listened to previous shows, but through the whole of TTR's archives, because we've got a lot of cool stuff that that you really should be downloading and listening to. Our hosts are always so knowledgeable, so entertaining. The guests that people have on are so awesome. So please do spend your day going back through and finding some other shows to listen to. If you choose not to do that, that is also absolutely fine. I will be back next week. I don't remember off the top of my head what next week's show is. So I will be quite surprised later on this afternoon when I go to plan it. But I am looking forward to it. I love spending my Saturday mornings with you all. So thank you, as always, for listening, for giving me this platform, because without my listeners, there would be no point in me being here. Have yourselves a fantastic week. 新年快乐. Happy New Year if you are choosing to celebrate the Lunar Year as we go into it on Wednesday. And I will see you all next Saturday. Thank you very much and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.